And that's a problem too. I mean, we have hundreds of myths and traditions from countries all around the globe which speak of a great global cataclysm, a huge flood, often wildfires, destruction of human beings and of animals, a few survivors who seek to restart civilization. It's a global story.
According to the Smithsonian, sea levels rose around 400 feet in the past 20,000 years. If that is true, then we should be looking for traces of our ancient past, deep beneath the sea. So what are we waiting for?
You have to look at the world during the Ice Age. Sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. That means the world looked very, very different. Easter Island is just a little speck. But it was a part of a big archipelago of islands. Wow, if you go back 20,000 years.
It is evident that the myth of a great flood that almost destroys mankind is prevalent in numerous cultures across the planet, from India to ancient Mesopotamia, to the ancient Greeks, the Abrahamic religions, all the way to the Incas in South America. Don't worry, this isn't going to be one of those rehashed and replayed videos about Atlantis. On this channel, we delve into archaeological findings and how they correlate with myths and legends. Still, I can't talk about submerged cities and not mention it at all, can I? Because if you grew up in Europe or the USA, chances are you've heard of Atlantis, the supposedly advanced ancient civilization that got swallowed by the sea in a cataclysmic event. Most archaeologists believe that the story of Atlantis is the story of the Greek island of Thera, also known as Santorini. At the time of the tragedy, Thera was inhabited by the Minoan civilization, and the story fits well in the Atlantis narrative. I mean, it's not perfect, but nothing ever is. Thera was the setting of one of the most destructive volcanic eruptions in human history, which destroyed the majority of the island, which was inevitably swallowed by the sea. Not only that, but the resulting tsunami also devastated the original Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, thus ending the reign of the bull worshippers, who most likely spawned the legend of the Minotaur. If you want me to talk more about that, I will dedicate a separate video specifically to that topic. Just let me know in the comments. But today I want to alert you to the fact that, despite our fascination with Atlantis, there are other underwater sites across the world that deserve our attention. Yet they are not well known. There are several huge problems with underwater research. It is expensive, time-consuming, and often dangerous. But with new emerging technologies like ROVs, underwater LiDAR, nuclear magnetic resonance magnetometers, multi-beam bathymetry, side-scan sonars, sub-bottom profilers, and satellite positioning systems, all that is about to change. And who knows, maybe the greatest secrets of our past indeed lie at the bottom of the ocean. One of the stories that blew me away was the chance discovery of a sunken Roman ship near the island of Antikythera. Yup, you heard that right. The mechanism you saw do funky stuff in Indiana Jones, the Dial of Destiny, is in fact real, and it was found accidentally near the island it was named after. The story goes that in 1901, sponge divers were diving near the island of Antikythera when one of them stormed out of the water, terrified out of his mind, screaming how he saw ghosts at the bottom of the sea. Upon further inspection, it was revealed that the ghosts were in fact marble statues of humans, but there were a bunch of other artifacts as well. At approximately 45 meters deep, they found the remnants of a Roman cargo ship that was shipwrecked there thousands of years ago, or, to be more precise, around 70 to 60 BC. With all the amazing statues and artifacts, almost no one paid any attention to a metallic clump encrusted in coral. Even though in 1902, an archaeologist named Valerio Staes claimed he saw gears within the mechanism, he was ridiculed because no one believed that ancient Romans could create something like that. Almost a century later, the clump would prove to be far more valuable and far more interesting than anything else found at the site. It was labeled the Antikythera mechanism, and it is now considered to be the world's first analog computer. Its purpose was to predict the movement of celestial objects in the sky, and it did it with incredible precision. In my opinion, it is the best evidence we have so far that proves that our ancient ancestors knew much more than we give them credit for. But even though the discovery of the Antikythera was amazing, it was still just one shipwreck. What about entire cities found underwater? Well, the best example of that is probably Heraklion, or Thonis. Fragments from ancient scripts teach us that thousands of years ago, the Nile Delta was dotted by a multitude of islands. These islands were supposedly the location of the, once thought mythical, city of Heraklion, which was its Greek name, or Thonis as it was known by the Egyptians. Even the fable of the Trojan War mentions that Helen of Troy and her prince Paris visited Heraklion at one point. Once again, we are faced with the incredible shallow-mindedness of mainstream archaeology. It is crazy to me that up until the year 2000, no one ever thought to look for the city underwater. Those who believed it was real figured it must be located on land and spent years looking for it. And all that time, it was sitting less than 7 kilometers from land at a depth of less than 6 meters. It was staring at us all this time, but nobody bothered to look. It was a French archaeologist by the name of Frank Gaudiot who found the fabled city after a 5-year-long search. The agreement was that no artifact would be removed unless it was critical for their preservation. It must have been a marvelous occasion when the first artifacts came to light. But probably the biggest revelation was the stele that confirmed Thonis and Heraklion were one and the same. For the longest time, archaeologists thought they were 2 different cities, and they searched for them on dry land. In its heyday, this city controlled most of the maritime traffic coming into Egypt from the Mediterranean. It was crisscrossed by a network of canals, dotted with harbors, wharves, temples, and tower houses, all joined together by a network of ferries, bridges, and pontoons. But there was one key problem with this place. It was built in the Nile Delta, in a marshy, swampy area where the silt from the Nile accumulates. That doesn't sound too stable to me.
All that silt is then dumped in the Nile Delta, and there were constructions were made on top of it. And the submergence of the sites off Alexandria, which is a magical, spooky place to dive, by the way. I've been lucky enough to dive there. The submergence of those sites is largely because of subsidence of land rather than sea level rise, because it's relatively recent.
What Hancock is saying is that the foundations of this city were basically washed away and it crumbled. But there were most likely other factors as well, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, rising sea levels, and a huge flood that happened around 101 BC. The term used for this is soil liquefaction, so you can imagine what that looks like. Even though we are fairly familiar with the history of Europe and the Middle East, there is so much history in other parts of the world as well. For example, the submerged city of Dwaraka in India. Dwaraka means gated city in Sanskrit, and its first mention is in the Indian epic Mahabharata as the capital of the Anarta kingdom. According to the epic, Krishna flees to the western coast of India after a particularly devastating war. There, he builds a city so lavish that it becomes known as the city made of gold. Fast forward to the day when this city met its doom.
The sea, which had been beating against the shores, suddenly broke the boundary that was imposed on it by nature. The sea rushed into the city. It coursed through the streets of the beautiful city. The sea covered up everything in the city. I saw the beautiful buildings becoming submerged one by one. In a matter of a few moments, it was all over. The sea had now become as placid as a lake. There was no trace of the city. Dwaraka was just a name, just a memory.
Sometimes myths turn out to be real. It happened when Heinrich Schliemann found the city of Troy. And it happened again when India's National Institute of Oceanography dove under the sea and found remains of an ancient city-state dated to 1500 BC. The conclusion was that the city might actually be the mythical Dwaraka, as described in the myth. As it turns out, myths and legends tend to have much more substance to them than mainstream history would permit us to believe. However, all of these stories somehow came to us, even if just through myths or legends. But what about the history that happened so long ago, that it vanished from our collective consciousness? We might get a glimpse of it here and there, but it is but a whisper on a dreary winter night. I'm talking about something that happened even before history was born. We know so little about underwater places like Atlit Yam near Israel, or Yonaguni in Japan. As it turns out, sea levels were much different during the last ice age, and depending on the steepness of the coastline, entire cities could have ended up in the sea.
If you have a very steep coastline, the effect of the sea level rise, the amount of land it eats up, is going to be a lot less than if you have a gradually sloping coastline. Calculation is that 27 million square kilometers that was above water during the Ice Age is underwater now.
Wow, 27 million square kilometers. We're gonna have some fun exploring that.